Verses 11 to 20. There is no respect of persons with God, v. 11. As to the spiritual state, there is a respect of persons, but not as to outward relation or condition. Jews and Gentiles stand upon the same level before God. This was Peter's remark upon the first taking down of the partition wall, Acts 10:34, that God is no respecter of persons, and it is explained in the next words, that in every nation he that fears God, and works righteousness, is accepted of him. God does not save men with respect to their external privileges or their barren knowledge and profession of the truth, but according as their state and disposition really are. In dispensing both his frowns and favors it is both to Jew and Gentile. If to the Jews first, who had greater privileges, and made a greater profession, yet also to the Gentiles, whose want of such privileges will neither excuse them from the punishment of their ill-doing nor bar them out from the reward of their well-doing. See Colonel 3:11, for shall not the judge of all the earth do right? He proves the equity of his proceedings with all, when he shall actually come to judge them, v. 12:16, upon this principle, that which is the rule of man's obedience is the rule of God's judgment. 3 degrees of light are revealed to the children of men. The light of nature. This the Gentiles have, and by this they shall be judged, as many as have sinned without law shall perish without law, that is, the unbelieving Gentiles, who had no other guide but natural conscience, no other motive but common mercies, and had not the law of Moses nor any supernatural revelation, shall not be reckoned with for the transgression of the law they never had, nor come under the aggravation of the Jews' sin against and judgment by the written law, but they shall be judged by, as they sin against, the law of nature, not only as it is in their hearts, corrupted, defaced, and imprisoned in unrighteousness, but as in the uncorrupt original the judge keeps by him. Further to clear this, v. 14:15, in a parenthesis, he evinces that the light of nature was to the Gentiles instead of a written law. He had said, v. 12, they had sinned without law, which looks like a contradiction, for where there is no law there is no transgression. But, says he, though they had not the written law, PS 147:20, they had that which was equivalent, not to the ceremonial, but to the moral law. They had the work of the law. He does not mean that work which the law commands, as if they could produce a perfect obedience, but that work which the law does. The work of the law is to direct us what to do, and to examine us what we have done. They had that which directed them what to do by the light of nature, by the force and tendency of their natural notions and dictates they apprehended a clear and vast difference between good and evil. They did by nature the things contained in the law. They had a sense of justice and equity, honor and purity, love and charity. The light of nature taught obedience to parents, pity to the miserable, conservation of public peace and order, forbade murder, stealing, lying, perjury, etc. Thus they were a law unto themselves. They had that which examined them as to what they had done, their conscience also bearing witness. They had that within them which approved and commended what was well done and which reproached them for what was done amiss. Conscience is a witness, and first or last will bear witness, though for a time it may be bribed or browbeaten. It is instead of 1,000 witnesses, testifying of that which is most secret, and their thoughts accusing or excusing, passing a judgment upon the testimony of conscience by applying the law to the fact. Conscience is that candle of the Lord which was not quite put out, no, not in the Gentile world. The heathen have witnessed to the comfort of a good conscience. In the latter part of the chapter the apostle directs his discourse more closely to the Jews, and shows what sins they were guilty of, notwithstanding their profession and vain pretensions. He had said, v. 13, that not the hearers but the doers of the law are justified, and he here applies that great truth to the Jews. Observe. He allows their profession, v. 17:20, and specifies their particular pretensions and privileges in which they prided themselves, that they might see he did not condemn them out of ignorance of what they had to say for themselves. No, he knew the best of their cause. They were a peculiar people, separated and distinguished from all others by their having the written law and the special presence of God among them. Thou art called a Jew, not so much in parentage as profession. It was a very honorable title. Salvation was of the Jews, and this they were very proud of, to be a people by themselves, and yet many that were so called were the vilest of men. It is no new thing for the worst practices to be shrouded under the best names, for many of the synagogue of Satan to say they are Jews, Revelation 2:9, for a generation of vipers to boast they have Abraham to their father, Mt 3:7-9. And restest in the law, that is, they took a pride in this, that they had the law among them, had it in their books, read it in their synagogues. They were mightily puffed up with this privilege, and thought this enough to bring them to heaven, though they did not live up to the law. To rest in the law, with a rest of complacency and acquiescence, is good, but to rest in it with a rest of pride and slothfulness and carnal security, is the ruin of souls. The temple of the Lord, Jah 7:4. Bethel their confidence, Jah 48:13. Haughty because of the holy mountain, Zeb 3:11. It is a dangerous thing to rest in external privileges, and not to improve them. And makest thy boast of God. See how the best things may be perverted and abused. A believing, humble, thankful glorying in God, is the root and summary of all religion. But a proud vainglorious boasting in God, and in the outward profession of His name, is the root and summary of all hypocrisy. Spiritual pride is of all kinds of pride the most dangerous. They were a knowing people, v18 and knowest His will, to the lema the will. God's will is the will, the sovereign, absolute, irresistible will. The world will then, and not till then, be set to rights, when God's will is the only will, and all other wills are melted into it. They did not only know the truth of God, but the will of God, that which He would have them to do. It is possible for a hypocrite to have a great deal of knowledge in the will of God and approvest the things that are more excellent decamazis ta diapheranta. Paul prays for it for his friends as a very great attainment, Philosophy 1:10. Eis to decamazian himus ta diapheranta. Understand it. Of a good apprehension in the things of God, reading it thus, thou discernest things that differ, knowest how to distinguish between good and evil, to separate between the precious and the vile, Jah 15:19, to make a difference between the unclean and the clean. Good and bad lie sometimes so near together that it is not easy to distinguish them, but the Jews, having the touchstone of the law ready at hand, were, or at least thought they were, able to distinguish, to cleave the hair in doubtful cases. A man may be a good casuist and yet a bad Christian, accurate in the notion, but loose and careless in the application. Or, we may, with deduce, understand controversies by the ta diapheranta. A man may be well skilled in the controversies of religion, and yet a stranger to the power of godliness. Of a warm affection to the things of God, as we read it, approvest the things that are excellent. There are excellences in religion which a hypocrite may approve of. There may be a consent of the practical judgment to the law, that it is good, and yet that consent overpowered by the lusts of the flesh, and of the mind. And it is common for sinners to make that approbation an excuse which is really a very great aggravation of a sinful course. They got this acquaintance with, and affection to, that which is good, but being instructed out of the law, kate jominos being catechized. The word signifies an early instruction in childhood. It is a great privilege and advantage to be well catechized betimes. It was the custom of the Jews to take a great deal of pains in teaching their children when they were young, and all their lessons were out of the law. It were well if Christians were but as industrious to teach their children out of the gospel. Now this is called, v20, the form of knowledge, and of the truth in the law, that is, the show and appearance of it. Those whose knowledge rests in an empty notion, and does not make an impression on their hearts, have only the form of it, like a picture well drawn and in good colors, but which wants life. A form of knowledge produces but a form of godliness. A form of knowledge may deceive men, but cannot impose upon the piercing eye of the heart-searching God. A form may be the vehicle of the power, but he that takes up with that only is like sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal. They were a teaching people, or at least thought themselves so, v19:20, and art confident that thou thyself art a guide of the blind. Apply it. To the Jews in general, they thought themselves guides to the poor blind Gentiles that sat in darkness, were very proud of this, that whoever would have the knowledge of God must be beholden to them for it. All other nations must come to school to them, to learn what is good, and what the Lord requires, for they had the lively oracles. To their rabbis, and doctors, and leading men among them, who were especially those that judged others, v1. These prided themselves much in the possession they had got of Moses's chair, and the deference which the vulgar paid to their dictates, and the apostle expresses this in several terms: a guide of the blind, a light of those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of babes, the better to set forth their proud conceit of themselves, and contempt of others. This was a string they loved to be harping upon, heaping up titles of honor upon themselves. The best work, when it is prided in, is unacceptable to God. It is good to instruct the foolish, and to teach the babes, but considering our own ignorance, and folly, and inability to make these teachings successful without God, there is nothing in it to be proud of.